Marcus stood in the center of the bustling terminal, his old scuffed boots looking like a stain, on the polished marble floor of the world's most expensive airport. In his hand, he clutched a simple paper bag containing a single sandwich, while around him, elite travelers in designer suits hurried toward private lounges. He looked like a man who had lost everything, a ghost in a palace of glass and steel. But as he looked up at the massive digital flight board, a cold, sharp glint flickered in his eyes, the kind of look a predator gives before the final strike. Before we dive deeper into this incredible journey of betrayal and hidden power, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from today? We love seeing how far our stories travel. And if you enjoy powerful stories of justice and redemption like this one, don't forget to subscribe to Crown Tales and join our community. 10 years ago, Marcus was the man everyone wanted to be. He was a visionary, a brilliant engineer who had designed the very infrastructure that kept the city running. Beside him was Sarah, the woman he thought was his soulmate. They had started with nothing, sharing ramen noodles in a cramped apartment while Marcus sketched blueprints late into the night. When Marcus finally secured the multi-billion-dollar contract to build the Grand Horizon Airport, he thought their lives were set forever. But power has a way of turning even the purest hearts into stone. As the project neared completion, Marcus fell mysteriously ill. His memory began to fade, his hands shook, and the doctors couldn't find a cause. While he was bedridden, Sarah stepped in to manage the business. She brought in a new chief legal officer, a man named Daniel. Daniel was smooth, articulate, and fiercely ambitious. Together, Sarah and Daniel convinced a weakened Marcus to sign over his power of attorney, claiming it was the only way to save the project from bankruptcy. The day the ink dried on those papers was the day Marcus's life ended. Within 48 hours, he was forcefully committed to a remote psychiatric facility. Sarah didn't even visit him to say goodbye. She simply sent a courier with divorce, papers, and a letter stating that he was no longer fit to handle his own affairs. For 7 long years, Marcus was a prisoner in a white room, drugged into a fog, while the world moved on. Sarah and Daniel didn't just take his money. They took his name. They rebranded the airport as the SD, International, standing for Sarah and Daniel. They became the it couple of the global elite, featured on the covers of every business magazine, hailed as the geniuses who built the $75 billion aviation empire. But what Sarah didn't know was that Daniel was playing a double game. And what Daniel didn't know was that Marcus had a secret protector. A nurse at the facility, a woman named Lena, had been watching Marcus for years. She saw the way his eyes cleared when the medication wore off. She saw him sketching complex architectural diagrams on the back of napkins with a stolen pencil. Lena knew he wasn't crazy. He was being poisoned. "They think you're dead to the world." "Marcus," Lena whispered one night, handing him a clean set of clothes and a forged discharge paper. "But the world needs to see what they did to you." Lena had spent months slowly replacing Marcus's medication with vitamins, allowing his mind to sharpen. She used her own meager savings to help him disappear into the shadows of the city. For 3 years, Marcus lived as a ghost. He worked as a janitor, a dock worker, a nameless face in the crowd. He watched from the sidelines as Sarah and Daniel expanded the airport, adding luxury terminals and private hangars. He also watched as their relationship began to fracture. Daniel was greedy. He wanted the entire $75 billion for himself. He began funneled money into offshore accounts, preparing to squeeze Sarah out, just as they had squeezed out Marcus. Lena, who had become Marcus's eyes and ears on the inside, discovered that Sarah was planning a massive gala to celebrate the airport's 10th anniversary. It was the perfect stage. Now, standing in the terminal he built, Marcus felt the weight of the past. He walked toward the VIP check-in desk. He was dressed in a tattered gray hoodie and worn jeans. "Excuse me," Marcus said softly to the agent behind the desk. "I need to speak with the manager regarding a security flaw in Terminal 4. The agent, a young woman who looked like she'd never seen a poor person in her life, sneered. "Sir, this desk is for Diamond members only. If you have a complaint about the toilets, please find a janitor." "I'm not talking about the toilets," Marcus replied, his voice growing steady. "I'm talking about the structural integrity of the main pylon. It was built with a specific override code that only the original architect knows. If that code isn't updated today, the entire digital grid will lock down." The agent laughed. "The original architect is in a private villa in Switzerland, retired. Now, move along before I call security." At that moment, a commotion broke out behind them. A phalanx of security guards cleared a path through the terminal. In the center of the circle walked Sarah. She was draped in a $20,000 silk coat, her diamonds catching the sunlight streaming through the vaulted glass ceiling. Beside her was Daniel, looking smug in a tailored navy suit. They were heading toward the private elevator that led to the executive suites. Marcus didn't move. He stood directly in their path. Sarah stopped, her nose wrinkling in disgust as she looked at the vagrant blocking her way. She didn't recognize him. To her, Marcus was a memory buried under layers of greed and time. He had lost weight, his beard was thick and graying, and the spark she once knew was hidden behind a mask of exhaustion. "Security!" Sarah snapped, not even looking at Marcus's face. "Why is this man standing in the VIP lane? Remove him immediately. He's ruining the aesthetic of the morning." Daniel stepped forward, leaning into Marcus's space. "You heard the lady, pal. Get lost before we have you arrested for loitering." Marcus looked Daniel straight in the eye. "The foundation of this building is built on a lie, Daniel, and lies have a habit of collapsing." Daniel froze. Something in that voice, a resonance, a frequency, triggered a memory. He squinted at Marcus. "What did you just say?" "I said," Marcus raised his voice so the surrounding travelers could hear, "that the man who built this place wouldn't be very happy with how you're running it." Sarah let out a sharp, cold laugh. "The man who built this place? I built this place. My husband and I are the visionaries here. You're just a piece of trash looking for a handout." She turned to the head of security, a large man also named Marcus, the head guard. "Marcus, take this man out back. If he resists, use force. I don't want him anywhere near my airport." The head guard, Marcus, stepped forward and grabbed the protagonist's arm. But as he did, the protagonist leaned in and whispered a single string of numbers into the guard's ear. The guard's grip loosened instantly. His face went pale. Those numbers weren't just random digits. They were the private emergency bypass codes used only by the board of directors. Codes that hadn't been changed since the airport's inception. "Sir," the guard whispered, his voice trembling. "How do you know that code?" "Because I'm the one who wrote it," Marcus replied. Sarah, sensing the hesitation, screamed, "What are you waiting for? Drag him out!" "Wait," Daniel said, his eyes darting around nervously. He looked at the protagonist again, looking past the beard and the rags. His breath hitched. "Marcus! No! That's impossible. You're supposed to be in the facility." The crowd began to murmur. Cell phones were pulled out. People started recording. The Queen of Aviation was having a public meltdown with a homeless man who seemed to know her husband. "I was in the facility," Marcus said, his voice echoing through the terminal, until the light came back. "I've spent 3 years watching you two. I've watched you steal from the pension funds. I've watched you take bribes from the construction contractors. And I've watched you, Daniel, slowly draining Sarah's personal accounts." Sarah's head whipped around to look at Daniel. "What? What is he talking about?" "He's crazy, Sarah. Don't listen to him," Daniel shouted, his face turning a deep shade of red. "He's a delusional schizophrenic. Guard, take him now!" But the head guard didn't move. He looked at the protagonist with a sense of dawning realization. He had worked at the airport since the groundbreaking ceremony. He remembered the real boss. He remembered the man who used to buy coffee for the construction crews and knew every welder's name. "Sarah," Marcus said, stepping closer. "You asked security to take me out of your airport. But there's a small detail you forgot in your rush to get rid of me 10 years ago." He pulled a crumpled, yellowed document from his paper bag. When we signed the partnership agreement, I created a parent company, a holding firm that owns 51% of the land this airport sits on. You own the buildings, Sarah. You own the planes. But I own the earth beneath them. And according to the contract, if the landowner is ever illegally incarcerated or declared missing by foul play, the entire lease is voided. Sarah's eyes widened. That's a lie! We cleared all the legal hurdles. You cleared the hurdles Daniel told you about, Marcus countered. But Daniel didn't know about the Lena Trust. It's a dormant entity named after the woman who saved my life. Suddenly, the large digital screens throughout the terminal flickered. The advertisements for luxury watches and perfumes disappeared. In their place, a grainy video began to play. It was a recording from a hidden camera in a high-end restaurant. In the video, Daniel was sitting with a woman who looked remarkably like Sarah, but younger. It was Lena, but not the nurse Lena. It was a different Lena, a cousin Daniel had hired to impersonate Sarah in legal meetings to sign away the remaining land rights. In the video, Daniel was heard saying, "Once the airport hits the 10-year mark, we trigger the final sale. Sarah gets the blame for the tax evasion, and we disappear with the $15 billion in the offshore account. She'll be in a cell right next to where her husband used to be." The terminal went silent. Thousands of people watched as the betrayal unfolded on the big screens. Sarah turned to Daniel, her face a mask of horror. "Daniel, you were going to frame me?" Daniel backed away, his hands up. "Sarah, honey, it's not what it looks like. That video is a deep fake. It's him. He's doing this." He pointed at Marcus. But the crowd wasn't looking at the homeless man anymore. They were looking at a ghost who had come back for his kingdom. The head guard, Marcus, stepped toward Daniel and placed a firm hand on his shoulder. "Sir, I think you need to come with us." "No!" Sarah shrieked. "Arrest them both! This is my airport. I am Sarah. I own this." Marcus stepped forward until he was inches from the woman he once loved. He didn't look at her with hate, but with a cold, devastating pity. "You don't own anything anymore, Sarah," Marcus said quietly. "I just triggered the insolvency clause. As of 60 seconds ago, the bank has frozen every account associated with this terminal. You're not the owner. You're a trespasser." Sarah looked around frantically. She pulled her phone out, trying to call her lawyer, her banker, anyone. But as she looked at the screen, her face turned pale. Access denied. Just then, a fleet of black SUVs pulled up to the curb outside the glass doors. Men in suits with federal investigator badges began pouring into the terminal. They weren't there for the man in the hoodie. They were heading straight for Sarah and Daniel. But as the lead investigator approached, he didn't stop at the couple. He walked straight to Marcus and handed him a briefcase. "Everything is ready, sir," the investigator said. "The board is waiting for your signal." Marcus took the briefcase and looked at Sarah. "You wanted me taken out, Sarah. Well, I'm going. But I'm taking the keys with me." He turned to the head guard. "Marcus, escort these two to the holding room. They have a lot of questions to answer regarding the disappearance of the original CEO 10 years ago." As Sarah and Daniel were being led away in handcuffs, screaming at each other, Marcus stood alone in the center of the terminal. The crowd began to applaud, a slow build of sound that filled the massive space. But Marcus wasn't listening to the cheers. He looked up at the ceiling, at the intricate glasswork he had designed in a tiny apartment a decade ago. He had his airport back. He had his life back. But he knew the real battle was only just beginning. Because while he had exposed Daniel's plan to frame Sarah, he hadn't yet revealed the biggest secret of all, the reason why he was really poisoned, and who was actually pulling Daniel's strings from the shadows. Marcus opened the briefcase. Inside was a single burner phone. It began to vibrate. He answered it. "It's done," Marcus said. A voice on the other end, cold and familiar, replied, "You think it's over just because you have the airport? Look at the north hangar, Marcus. Look at it right now." Marcus turned his gaze toward the massive windows overlooking the runway. In the distance, at the far end of the north hangar, a massive plume of black smoke began to billow into the sky. The alarms started to scream. The story is only half over. What is hidden in the north hangar? And who is the mysterious person on the phone who seems to be one step ahead of everyone? The high-pitched scream of the fire alarms cut through the applause like a jagged blade. Thousands of travelers froze, their eyes shifting from the drama of the arrest to the horizon, where the North Hangar, the crown jewel of the airport's private jet division, was being swallowed by a wall of crimson flame. Marcus gripped the burner phone, his knuckles white. The voice on the other end chuckled, a sound like dry leaves skittering over a grave. Did you really think Sarah and Daniel were the masterminds, Marcus? They were just the distractions, greedy children playing with a king's toys. Marcus looked out at the inferno. Who is this? Someone who knows that 75 billion isn't just a price tag. It's a target, the voice replied before the line went dead. The terminal erupted into chaos. Security teams scrambled, and the federal investigators who had just handcuffed Sarah and Daniel were now shouting into their radios. In the confusion, Daniel saw his opening. He shoved a distracted guard and bolted toward the service stairs, his eyes wild with a desperate last-ditch hope. Sarah, however, remained frozen, her designer coat discarded on the floor, staring at the man she had betrayed. "Marcus," she whispered, her voice trembling. "What did you do? What is happening?" Marcus didn't look at her. He looked at the head guard. Marcus. The North Hangar isn't just for planes. That's where the central server for the entire city's aviation grid is housed. If that hangar goes, every plane currently in the air loses its navigation. We're looking at a catastrophe. The head guard's eyes went wide. But the fire suppression system, it should have triggered. It was bypassed, Marcus said, his mind racing through the blueprints he had memorized a decade ago. Someone didn't just want to hurt me. They want to bring down the entire system. Marcus grabbed a radio from the guard's belt. "This is Marcus. I'm taking command of Emergency Protocol Delta. Clear the runways. Divert all incoming flights to the regional strips. Now." As the staff began to move, Marcus didn't head for the exit. He headed deeper into the bowels of the airport. He knew there was only one person who could have bypassed his original security encryptions. Someone who knew his coding style better than Sarah or Daniel ever could. He reached the sub-level maintenance tunnels, the air thick with the smell of ozone and smoke. Standing near the manual override console was a figure draped in a dark technician's jumpsuit. The figure turned. It was Lena, not the cousin Daniel had used, but the nurse who had rescued Marcus from the asylum. Marcus stopped, the air leaving his lungs. "Lena, you were the one who got me out. You were the one who helped me rebuild my mind." Lena held a tablet in her hand, her fingers dancing across the screen as the fire in the hangar intensified on the monitors behind her. "I did, Marcus, because I needed you to come back. I needed you to trigger the insolvency clause. I needed the banks to freeze the accounts so I could redirect the flow." "You weren't saving me," Marcus said, the realization hitting him like a physical blow. "You were using me to unlock the vault." "Sarah and Daniel were amateurs," Lena said, her voice cold and professional. "They wanted the lifestyle. I want the power. By the time the fire is out, the 15 billion in the offshore accounts won't belong to Daniel. It will be gone, laundered through 1,000 ghost accounts I created while you were recovering in my care." Marcus stepped forward. "I trusted you, Lena. You gave me my life back." "I gave you a weapon, Marcus." "I just didn't tell you I held the trigger," Lena replied. She pointed to the screen. "In 3 minutes, the server will melt. The data of every transaction, every secret contract, and every bribe Sarah ever took will be erased. And I'll be on a flight to a country that doesn't have an extradition treaty." Marcus looked at the console. He realized that Lena had linked the fire suppression system to a logic bomb. If he turned on the water, it would short-circuit the servers, deleting the evidence he needed to keep Sarah and Daniel in prison and prove his own innocence. If he let it burn, the planes in the sky were in danger. It was the ultimate betrayal. The woman who had been his light in the darkness was actually the shadow behind the curtain. "You won't do it, Marcus," Lena said, walking toward the emergency exit. "You're too good of a man. You'll save the planes, and in doing so, You'll burn the only evidence that can clear your name. You'll be the madman who returned to his airport only to burn it down." She disappeared into the shadows of the tunnel. Marcus stood before the red lever. His heart pounded in his chest. For a moment, he thought of Sarah's betrayal. The 7 years of his life stolen, the drugs, the white room. He thought of Daniel's greed. He could let it all burn. He could walk away and let Lena take the money, as long as he had his revenge. But then he looked at the flight monitors. Flight 402, Flight 119, hundreds of families, thousands of lives. Marcus closed his eyes. "I'm not the man they tried to make me," he whispered. He didn't pull the water lever. Instead, he ripped the panel off the wall and grabbed 2 live wires. If this story is gripping you as much as it's gripping Marcus, let us know in the comments. Do you think he can save the airport and his reputation? With the smell of burning copper filling the air, Marcus began to manually bypass the logic bomb. He wasn't using a computer. He was using his hands, reconnecting the physical relays he had designed years ago. The simple law of electricity flashed in his mind. He needed to create a resistance bridge to fool the system. He used his own wedding ring, the one Sarah had returned to him in a box of trash, and wedged it between the copper plates to bridge the gap. The sparks flew, searing his palms, but he didn't let go. Suddenly, the overhead sprinklers in the north hangar roared to life. On the monitors, the black smoke turned to white steam. The servers hissed, but they stayed online. The data was safe. The planes were safe. Marcus slumped against the wall, his hands scorched, his body trembling. Minutes later, the head guard, Marcus, burst into the room with a team of officers. They found him sitting there. The gold ring melted into the circuitry. "Sir, we found Daniel!" the guard shouted. He tried to take a private jet, but the lockdown caught him on the taxiway. "And we found a woman, nurse, trying to board a cargo plane with a series of encrypted hard drives." Marcus looked up, a weary smile on his face. "Did you get the drives?" "We did. And we found the records, sir. Everything. The poisoning, the false commitment papers, the offshore transfers. It's all there." 1 month later, the Grand Horizon Airport was officially renamed the Marcus International Gateway. The reopening ceremony was a somber affair. Marcus stood at the podium, his hands still bandaged, looking out at a sea of reporters. In the front row, Sarah sat in a different kind of jumpsuit, an orange one. She had been brought from the county jail to witness the finality of her loss before her sentencing. Daniel was already in a maximum security facility, facing 30 years for corporate espionage and attempted manslaughter. Lena, the most dangerous of them all, was still awaiting trial, her web of lies finally unraveled by the very man she thought she had mastered. Marcus looked into the cameras. Success isn't measured by the height of the buildings we own or the billions in our banks, Marcus said, his voice steady and resonant. It's measured by what we do when we have nothing left but our integrity. I was a man who was erased. I was a man who was forgotten. But the truth has a way of rising to the surface, no matter how deep you bury it. He looked directly at Sarah. There was no anger left, only the cold peace of justice. You told me once that I was a dreamer who didn't understand the real world, Marcus said. But the real world is built on foundations. If your foundation is greed, your empire will always fall. If your foundation is the truth, you can survive any storm. As the ceremony ended, Marcus walked toward the large glass windows. A plane was taking off, its silver wings catching the light of the setting sun. The head guard, Marcus, stepped up beside him. "What now, sir?" "The board is waiting for your new expansion plans." Marcus watched the plane disappear into the clouds. "Now," Marcus said softly, "we build something that isn't just about profit. We build something that lasts." "And Marcus?" "Yes, sir?" "Change the security codes. All of them." Marcus turned away from the window. Walking through the terminal he had built twice, once with blueprints, and once with his soul. He was no longer the ghost in the terminal. He was the master of the horizon. If this story moved you, or reminded you that justice always finds a way, Let us know in the comments. We love hearing your thoughts on these journeys of the heart.